Hello, everybody. Welcome to Failtober. If you are new to this page, my name is Carrie Tracy. I am behind Feel Good Teaching, STEMchallenge.com, and some other stuff. So I want to just kind of give you a little bit of the background of this. Let me turn my volume on my phone down so I can see your comments if you have any. Let me kind of give you a background of what we're going to do during all of Failtober, but today as well. So this is our agenda. I want to tell you who is this for and kind of what is it. So I've sort of been playing a little bit coy with the post that you may have seen that brought you here from Instagram or Facebook, or maybe you saw the blog post. So what is it? Why is it a thing that's important? And then really the how is, I think, what's going to be the most important of this. So we'll get started on the how today, and we're going to do the how every Wednesday of this month. So we will be doing 5 lives this month, every Wednesday, same time, 5 p.m. And at the end of this, when we get to the overview, as you see in the agenda, I'll show you what we're going to be actually talking about each of the weeks. So let's get started. Who? So who is Failtober for? So this is really for teachers and parents who are interested in figuring out ways to help their students or their kids develop a more healthy relationship with failure. And we're going to be talking about the difference today between abject failure and productive failure. And of course, productive failure is what I'm really referring to most of the time when we go through Failtober. So who? It's basically teachers, particularly STEM teachers, but not just them. I mean, it can be any teacher who's interested in growth mindset and, like I said, developing healthy relationship with productive failure, not just for their students, but for themselves, because we are going to find that throughout the month we might need to do some work on our own attitudes and thoughts that we may not have examined and may not have realized are leading to some negative effects in our classrooms. So what I am aiming to do throughout this month is to give you practical ways that you can actually sort of start to gain some ground here, because it's not an easy thing. We're talking about potentially really shifting someone's mindset from like fear and terror about failure into understanding how it can actually be really helpful. So we will need to tackle this a little bit at a time. And, you know, ultimately, for me, it's a lot about, we often tell students how we want them to react to a situation or how we want them to think about a situation, and then we don't really give them the tools or the practice that they need in order to sort of, you know, figure out how to behave those ways, right? So that's what we're really getting at throughout this month. And I wanted to choose October for Failtober because it just made sense, the fear behind it, the terror. And so we'll see these little gremlins that I pull in on the agendas and some of the announcements in the posts throughout the month. Just to sort of, for me, it's sort of a little like tongue-in-cheek, like these are the gremlins, these are the things that we, you know, the boogeymen under the bed, and really when you look at them, they're kind of ridiculous, right? So that's why those are sort of the mascots, I guess, for this whole month. All right, so let's get into the why, because the why can be really helpful. I'm going to tell you my why, and I'm sure some of you will relate to some of it. But our unexamined beliefs as teachers, as parents, can really lead a lot to, you know, our approach to teaching and our approach to parenting. And because we haven't examined all the time these unconscious beliefs, we don't realize what an impact they could be making. And I'm going to give you an example from almost a decade ago in my 2nd grade classroom that sort of was the impetus for really the last 10 years of my life. It really was sort of this epiphany type moment, and it shouldn't have been, but let me just tell you what happened. So my 2nd graders wanted to do a plant lab, and they had their different groups, and each group was testing something different for bean plants. One group was testing different liquids. You know, if we use milk instead of water, so it was like milk, water, orange juice, and like Coca-Cola or something like that. So one group did that. Another group changed the soil type from like clay and rocky and all this. So basically, each of 4 groups were testing something different, a different variable for plant and its effect on plant growth. And about 2 weeks, 3 weeks in, none of the plants had grown. Like 0 of them had grown at just nothing at all. And every single day I would go into the classroom. Like the first week was fine. I didn't expect them to, so it was okay. And, you know, we get into like a week and a half, and I'm like, And I start to get that sort of cold, sweaty, nervous thing. Like, I'm the teacher, and I have just led my students into experiments that are all going to fail. And I had this moment of just being embarrassed, humiliated, wanting to just throw them all in the trash and pretend it never happened, or, make up, so like, go and redo them or something at home and bring them in, like, swap them out. And I took a step back, and I'm so glad I did. All of that has to do with my fear of failure. All of my reaction to it was about me feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to be found out. They're going to know I'm not perfect. They're going to know I don't know everything. They're going to know I make mistakes. Oh my God. And I had this moment where I was able to sort of step outside of myself and sort of ask, what would a scientist do in this situation? Because obviously scientists have experiments that fail. Do they go into a wild panic and throw everything away? Hopefully not. So I decided, okay, well, let's just sit down. So we basically had a class meeting and just said, okay, well, none of our plants have failed. Hey, Karen, nice to see you too. Well, see you. So I had this moment where, we had the kids out on the carpet, and I just said, I'm really surprised because it's been 3 weeks, and I know that plants usually grow, and I would think we'd see something by now. I'm really surprised we don't see anything. Not one single plant has grown. So why? Like, what could be happening? And it turned into one of the best lessons I've ever had in any of my years of teaching. And the student, it was scientific reasoning, it was logic, it was accepting that failure is going to happen with our labs sometimes, and then just using what we could with our background knowledge to try to figure out what might have caused it. What can we do to try the experiment again? And the kids asked all kinds of great questions, like, can seeds be dead, or can seeds be duds? Like, maybe we got a bad batch of seeds, or, we went through this whole thing. But my point is just that because I almost had my knee-jerk reaction to failure at that point, was just like sweep it under the carpet, pretend it never happened, because we don't want anyone to know. I almost missed out on what's probably one of the best science lessons I've ever had the opportunity to teach, because it really was, I think, more in line with true science, right? So we ended up like figuring out, well, maybe we needed to do something different with the seeds. Here's what we need to do. We need to do some research. Do we need to start the seeds in a different way and then get moving? And then we redid the experiment. And what, of course, I learned is that it didn't really matter that we failed, and in just about every way, it was better that we failed. Hi, Tammy. So that, to me, started sort of shifting how I thought about failure, and also becoming more conscious about how my fears were potentially impacting some of the lessons I would choose to do in my room, and some of the ways that I approach teaching. And as you become more conscious of them, of the way that you think, you are better able to decide if it's influencing you in a good way or a bad way, and make some better choices, right? So that's kind of behind the initial why for doing this particular month on all about failure, because it was such a huge impact in my life and in my teaching. So it sort of has led into, if you know me, you know that I do STEM challenges, and that is another thing that happened as a result of my exploration of getting more comfortable with failure and helping my students get more comfortable with failure, because I believe ultimately the more comfortable you are with productive failure, the more successful you will be in life and the happier you will be. And every great entrepreneur, every great business person, or athlete, musician, just about everybody in every field, if you really look at their wild success stories, they have the wild failure stories that they push through as well. So I feel it's one of the more important things, if not the most important thing, we can help our students develop in order for them to have the best possible lives. There's a quote I want to share with you about science from Carl Sagan. Science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge. And this is part of that. I've been working on for the last couple of weeks these STEM ideals. So they're basically traits, like character traits or ideals that STEM professionals sort of embody. And I have a set of 25 of them. And we'll be talking about more about that next week, because that's part of the how for next week. But I wanted to just point out that the very first one, as I was doing my research and I was compiling my lists and organizing them all out, the very first one that I had was embrace failure. And because it is, I think, the most important one, we're giving this whole month to it. So I would like to get into, so we're going to discuss more about that next week. So the how. Now we're into the how. We know it's important to do. We know the why. But the how to teach kids to be resilient and to have an ease with productive failure, how to separate their sense of self-worth from their actual achievements or the outcomes of their work, that is a lot easier said than done, right? And that's what we're doing really throughout this month, is looking for these little ways, these little doable things that we can bring into our classrooms and into our approaches and into our methodology to help do just that. And it's not going to be, again, it's not going to be like a magic bullet. It needs to be, I think, it's a culture shift. And it needs to be throughout all of your classes. If you're a self-contained teacher in the elementary school, perhaps, it does need to be within all of your classes. But I think it's easiest to do in science personally, but that just might be my own bias. I think it works really well in the STEM fields, but it can and should apply in many different places. So again, number one, we have to start with examining our own beliefs and become more conscious of them. So because we don't usually, well, I don't usually think of these things, I know how I experience failure. I have, like I said, I get that sort of like hot flash, then the cold sweat and the embarrassment and the humiliation, and then the total avoidance of it. I know that's my knee-jerk reaction to it. I know that's how it feels. But when I actually start to, if someone asks me, is failure a good thing? Even if they asked me back then, and I've done a lot of work since then for myself, even if they asked me back then, I would have said, oh, of course, you have to fail, to learn what works. And I could have told you in words what I thought I believed. But if I really looked at sort of my reptile response, my reptile brain, I could see that I didn't really, really believe that, or I wouldn't react the way that I had. So one of the things that I think has been really helpful is bringing in quotes is a very good first step for you and for your students. It's an easy thing to do. It's a quick thing to do. And that's why I made it the week 1 freebie for Failtober. You might have seen that. So on Facebook and on Instagram, I've been posting 1 quote per day. For all of October, you'll see a new quote every single day about failure. And if you wanted to, you could also get the printable versions that look like this. So this is the one that goes out today, I think. The most important of my discoveries have been suggested to me by my failures. And the printable options are available. Let me move this out. Are available to the people who are on the email subscriber list. And you can find those if you're interested if you go to bit.ly/Failtober. I'll put the link in after I'm done. So you can see it, but you can get the printable versions. And the printables actually have 43 quotes because even though October only has 31 days, I did have to narrow it down to 31, but I figured I already have the 43, so I made them. So you could continue them into November or sprinkle them out as you like. But what I like about the quotes is that, again, it's a quick thing. You can just have them up around your room, but I find that it's a really good thing to have the students discuss them with people. They don't have to do the same thing with the quotes every single day. They don't even necessarily have to interact too much with the quotes every single day, although I think the more you do, the better. This is the kind of thing that I think works really well as just a few minutes, like we finished this lesson 5 minutes early, so let's take a look at this quote, this quote of the day, put it in your own words or discuss it with your classmate. Do you agree with it or disagree with it? Why? What do you think this person was trying to say? Can you think of an example in your life that this applies to? Just different questions, different ways they can interact with the quote, because even though it's such a simple thing, just that act of seeing a quote and thinking about, do I agree with this or not? Do I believe this or not? Can start to sort of rewire if you have, like I do. I have like the grooves in my brain are tracked toward like a fixed mindset. And I have been really working on that for the last decade. And thinking like, oh my gosh, wouldn't this have been great if I had just been wired in a growth mindset way from the beginning? And that's sort of why I wanted to try to help my students at an earlier age, because there is, sort of some, neuroscience about, your brain has these pathways, and they're sort of like deep grooves or deep paths for these connections that you keep making, things that reaffirm the beliefs that you have. So if you can start to wire your brain in a way that says, yeah, failure can and absolutely is a really good thing if you use it properly, right? And so having these like one quote a day where you actually think about it, read about it, put it in your own words, can actually start to make these little grooves a little bit deeper every single day. So this, I think, is the most simple place to start, but it can be really effective too. So that's why you're seeing these quotes pop up in my feed, and that's why, hopefully, if you want, you can get those printables as well, or you can just use the feeds with your students. I really do like the idea of asking them. One of my go-tos is just, do you agree with this? Or to what extent do you agree with this quote? If there's somebody you know your students really respect or admire, so, in a lot of cases, it's, athletes and musicians, or actors or things like that, throwing in some from people that they already admire and respect, and like stories and anecdotes too, but we'll talk about more of that later this month, is helpful. It's helpful if they know who the person is who's done the quote. It's not necessary, but it is helpful if you find a few extras of people that they really enjoy or appreciate, or look up to, all those things. So let me see what I have next. Let me move down my list. So in addition to doing small things every day, like the quotes, and again, every Wednesday this month and throughout, I'll be making some other posts, but every Wednesday I'll be focusing on more little things that you can do. I think what's really important is consistency and variety. And you have to model it when it comes up. So when you have a plant lab that fails, you need to model how you want students to react in that situation, which I'm very grateful that I did, because again, I almost didn't. I was this close to just throwing them all away and being really frustrated and annoyed, which is not what I want for my students. When anything comes up in your classroom where there's failure, just becoming more aware of your reactions so that you can control them and understand that what you do is modeling for them what they should do. So I know it sounds really simple, but it's really hard sometimes, because you're used to going through your day and just trying to get your stuff done. And then when a lesson doesn't go the way you want to, it's extremely frustrating. So it can be difficult to take that step back and just recognize, why am I so angry right now? And sometimes you're angry because you had an expectation it was going to go a certain way, and then it didn't go a certain way. And so how do you want your students to react? Needs to be how you model it yourself. So you want to take those opportunities when they come up and view them like the opportunities that they are. Because again, some of your best lessons can come from something that really got messed up. And that's what you want your students to see. Some of the best things that might happen in our lives might initially look like a failure. Which brings me to the next point, abject failure versus productive failure. You do want to make sure that it's very clear to them, especially for younger students. It might be confusing when you talk about embracing failure, that we're not talking about failure of its own accord, just like, oh, I failed a test, yay. I mean, obviously not, right? So we want to talk about not looking at failure as though it's final. So if it's a failure and then nothing is done, like you then don't go back and try to fix it or try to learn something from it or do something new because of it or go down another path. If you don't use the lesson of the failure for something, I don't see what there is to celebrate, right? So we want to make sure they understand that what makes failure something we want to embrace is the part that comes after the failure. The persistence, the resilience, the bounce back, the thing that you do because of it, right? That next step, that next piece. And a lot of these quotes that you're going to see throughout the month emphasize that. And so that's the kind of thing I would probably do mid-month after they've seen, a good collection, 10 to 15 of these quotes, then to start to sort of pull out the common thread. What are you seeing? How are these quotes similar? And you can even just ask, like, so is all failure the same? Is all failure good? And just kind of see where that conversation goes. I like that as a class discussion. I like it as a journal or a quick write. There are lots of different ways to do these things, right? But the main thing is we want to make sure with the quotes, again, it's the simple way to do it, but it's also to help counter some of the messages that they may be seeing in their other classes or in their home life or in culture at large, because a lot of times failure isn't really considered much of a virtue or a good thing. You know, like nobody's excited that you didn't get the reading comprehension question right. You know, a lot of people are mocked, you know, when they try and fail. So there's an uphill battle here to some extent. I think it's become easier in the last several years because growth mindset has begun to gain a lot of steam recently. But I think that it's really important. This is why I want to spend the whole month talking about these small things that we can do to sort of drip it out, because I do think the consistency over time is really important, because they are getting a lot of these other messages in society and culture that failure is something to be embarrassed about, and it is something that's a problem or makes you bad or less than. So we need to make sure that we are providing messages that counter that and provide that wiring for them. That's going to help them understand how it is actually a good thing. And we have to back that up by modeling it and by making sure we take those opportunities when failure does occur in the classroom. It's like, okay, now how can we use this? How can we make something good from something, you know, unpleasant that happened? So that's kind of today's. Let me see if I have anything else on that. That's kind of today's how, is just start with the quotes. Start with the quotes and being really conscious about your beliefs about failure and your reactions to them as they happen in your classroom, because they're going to, because they happen everywhere, because that's life. Nobody's perfect. And perfect's kind of boring anyway, I think. Okay, so that's the how for this week. And I want to show you the overview of what we're going to be doing for the rest of the week. So let me pull my little gremlin guy out and show you what's coming up throughout the month. So today we did the overview and your relationship with failure. I will put the link in to get the printable quotes if you're interested in that. Next week, we're going to be talking about how STEM ideals equal life ideals. Now, if you're not a STEM teacher, but you are interested in growth mindset kind of stuff, or character ed even, you might want to tune in, because what I realized is, as I was grouping these ideal traits of STEM professionals, that when I looked at them, I really thought, you know, if anybody embodied all of these things, I think that would just be a good life. So don't feel like you can only come if you hire a STEM teacher. I think it is, I'm definitely gearing it more toward that, but I think it's really good. Oh, freebies. Oh my goodness, I forgot to tell you about freebies. So you know the printable freebies were week 1. I'm going to try to do a freebie every week, but you need to know that some of the weeks, including next week, I'm not going to just make a broad post. I'm going to tell you about how to get the freebie in that live, and it's going to be, next week's going to be a flash freebie. So what that means is I'm going to announce next week, here's a thing I'm giving for free. Here's when it's going to be free, during this time window. So you want to make sure next week that if you can't watch live, because I know some people are watching like in Australia and around the world, so this timing doesn't work very well, make sure you watch within 24 hours, because I will announce a flash freebie that's coming sometime after that. I'm definitely doing that next week. It might come up again. So just make sure with these lives this month, watch within the first 24 hours so you don't miss any of the freebies, okay? So anyway, next week, I'm really excited about that. I need to just wait until next week to tell you more. In week 3, we're going to talk about another how, which is Halloween STEM challenges. STEM challenges are probably one of my favorite ways to help students get more comfortable with productive failure, because it's such a microcosm that it just happens naturally in a very quick space of time. We'll talk more about that in week 3. In week 4, we'll talk about how, again, you can handle epic lab and epic STEM challenge failures in your classroom. What do you do? How do you avoid that sweaty panic moment that you might have and turn it into something that's really valuable? So I have I'll give you some different language, some different verbiage, some different ideas and activities, and then different levels of where you might want to go depending on like how epic is the failure. We'll talk about minor ones too, like minor frustrations, minor failures, but we'll probably spend more time on the epic ones, because I think that's the thing that holds some teachers back from even going forward with a STEM challenge that might seem too challenging, or a lab or an experiment that might seem too challenging. So we want to definitely spend some time on that. Week 5 is Halloween. So I know a lot of people probably won't watch live that day because they'll have plans, and that's okay. Just watch within the 24 hours, just in case there's a freebie. And then week 5, we're going to be doing a resource roundup and wrap up of the whole month. So one of the things is throughout the month on the Facebook page and maybe on Instagram as well, I'll see how it kind of works out. I'm going to have some other resources. So I might just have some picture books I want to share with you that you might want to share with your students, or not just necessarily picture books, but books or articles that would be good to use with your students as an article of the week or a close read. Videos you might want to show them. So there will be other resources sprinkled throughout. And in week 5, I will do sort of a resource roundup of what I've shared throughout the month to make sure that you had a chance to see them, because I know in Facebook feeds and stuff, you don't always get to see everything. Facebook doesn't show you everything it's meant to. So you gotta hate that when that happens. I'm just realizing that I don't know if there are any comments or not, but it timed out on my phone, and it won't show me on my screen. So if you made any comments that I haven't replied to yet, know that I'm not ignoring you, and as soon as I get off here, I'll go and check and make sure everything's okay. So, and reply to you there if there is anything. What was the last thing I wanted to tell you about the resource roundup? I don't remember. But this just sort of gives you an overview of what we're going to be doing. There will be, again, freebies throughout, resources throughout. This whole month is going to be themed, and hopefully it'll give you some really practical ideas that are easy for you to implement with your students and can help sort of wire them so that they can be more comfortable with productive failure, and I think ultimately lead better and more successful lives. With that, I'm going to head out for today, and I will see you next week to talk about STEM ideals and how they are very equal to life ideals, and I'll give you some good hows for this particular one, embracing productive failure. Hope you guys are having a great week and have a wonderful next week. I'll see you. Bye.